Good morning.
Good morning.
Is this everybody? Yep. All right. Well, thank you all for coming. My name is David Roth. I'm a landscape architect with graduate work in historic preservation. I didn't get my degree. Instead, I had 3 kids. Commuting to Ball State was not going to play anymore. So I worked on the Cultural Landscape Report, which is a report that documents the history of a property back in 2003. I worked on that with Deb. So I've been working here for about 15 years or more. I got a call one day from a friend of mine, Tom Fansler. He's a general contractor. They were going to build a boardwalk down the hill. So they started a little bit of initial work and they found some stepping stones. And they said, wait a minute, there's more here than what we know. And they uncovered this plan, which is the master plan for the 64-acre estate of Riverdale, the Allison property. So what they discovered is there are some stepping stones along here, right where the boardwalk was going to go. And Tom knew I was in graduate school. He called me and said, you got to get out here. We found this plan, uncovered a bunch more, went to Michigan State, found a bunch of drawings up there from Jensen, contacted a lady by the name of Shirley Summers. The Summers estate is a Cold Spring School. We went up, Deb and I interviewed her. She found a bunch of photographs of this property, or her uncle's property, and that's how we got into this. That's where all this came from. So I'm going to do a couple things. Tell you a little bit about Jensen, tell you a little bit about the property, and let you take a walk. So Jensen was a Danish immigrant. He started his career up in Chicago with the Chicago Parks District. He's responsible for sort of tying the parks together. So if you visit Chicago and the parks, Jensen's name will come up. He is known as the prophet of the prairie. This is a guy that was 100 years ahead of his time. He was a guy who was using native plants like, today, the big rage, right? Lead, native plantings, all that. He was a guy who said, this makes sense to me. If we're going to design something, let's put it in context. One of the things I mentioned to the last group is the formality of this sort of irritated him. But he was working for the Allisons. They wanted this sort of, parallel lines, everything on axis, blah, blah, blah. So he did it for them. He would have rather seen a more naturalized landscape up here. But it relates to the house, and the rest of the landscape is more his style. You'll see in this image right here, this is roughly the Allison estate in the orange. They had subdivided it and channelized Crooked Creek. You'll see the bend in it there. They had channelized it, and he saw this and thought to himself, the creek used to, hug the hillside. I am going to redesign the landscape to be more sympathetic to what nature had intended. There are springs coming out of the hillside. This is always wet, so he put the ponds in to mimic or recreate what nature had done previously. We think, so Allison was an automobile guy. Jensen had also designed the Henry Ford estate. So we think they're connected. I have not found any correspondence to that effect, but I think that's how Jensen got here, was through Henry Ford and Allison. They were contemporaries, obviously. So you know a little bit about Jensen. You're standing right here. So behind you, there were gardens and greenhouses where the parking lot is now. You can see that in a 1931 aerial photograph from the Star. You can see these are the gardens, there were some greenhouses, and that's the building. So that's been since demolished, but largely the 64-acre estate is intact, and we're in the process of slowly restoring it. One of the things we're working on currently is getting the colonnade restored. So what you see in front of you, Jensen always used 10 elements of design, and they're listed here on this first board. Typically, light and shadow, native plants, water, horizontal elements. So if you'll notice, that colonnade is sort of low. He wanted you to sort of observe the landscape, sort of see the horizon. So that would have been more open to the prairie below, and he wanted to bring your view down instead of making it more expansive. Just like the Midwestern landscape, everything is sort of flat and horizontal. This up here is a player's green, and I mentioned light and shadow. He worked with Bass to orient the garden and the house so that if there were performance up here, and I'm the audience, that the setting sun would be to their back. And then the reason for the evergreens is people would actually change back there. They would change costumes, and there would have been torches on either side, sort of front lighting them. What you see here is a council ring. It's an element that he always used. And so coming from his Danish history, he believed in sharing stories, getting together in groups like this, and that was a very important part of life for him. And so in the center of that, and I jokingly say St. Francis is literally on the hot seat, because that was a fire pit. It was a fire pit. We've talked about moving St. Francis, but I don't think that's going to happen. What else can I tell you? I said we were going to introduce Jensen, talk a little bit about the landscape, and then let you take a walk. Are there questions that anybody? Yeah, please.
Was the Brooklyn Heights, was it sort of plotted out to have a whole community, and then
yeah, just like a subdivision today.
Right.
Yep.
Okay, and then the mansions.
Yeah, and then right. So what I imagine is that Allison, came to the property and purchased a bunch of lots.
Yeah.
Put them together for his estate. He liked the location. Yeah, because it was, this was called Millionaire's Row, as I'm sure Deb mentioned.
Yeah.
So this was the place to be.
3 minutes.
3 minutes?
Yeah.
Yeah, if anybody wants to take a look or ask questions, I know I was a little bit all over the place, but I'd be glad to talk to you at any time. If you get a hold of Suzanne, meet you out here, whatever. If you're interested or have questions, send me an email.
Really fascinating.
It's
What about George Tesla? Were he and Jensen contemporaries?
They were working side by side. So the bridge down at the bottom of the hill, I've got a photograph that shows the new bridge over Crooked Creek with the Allison estate under construction in the background. So it's just fascinating.